everybody. Welcome back to Echoes of War. This is Craig from the Pacific War Channel, joined here by my co-host, Gaurav. How are you?
Hey Greg, great to be here. And today is, you could say, is the climax of the main like the final finale of this Greco-Persian war series, and really excited to reach a conclusion, as it just
Yeah,
sets up the
and
Greeks for more infighting in the future.
of course. And to set up the tale, we have here our PhD scholar, Dan. How are you?
Yeah, really good, thanks. And as always, it's a pleasure and thank you for sharing your platform with me.
Absolutely. And as everybody probably knows, clicking on the title of this, it'll probably be titled The Battle of Plataea. But before we jump into it, I just want to say to the audience, if you're not already joining us on YouTube, please do, as we're going to have a ton of portraits and maps to kind of explain, the finer details of this. And honestly, it helps with the geography. I don't think everybody's fantastic at the geography of Greece and the Mediterranean, for that matter. And also, if you like to further support the channel, please consider joining our YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel. By joining either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast series. You get early access to all the content I make and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. And there is a poll as we speak with 4 select choices. So if you join fast, you can vote there. But without further ado, Dan, why don't you take us into it?
Yep, so we've just concluded the Battle of Salamis, massive catastrophe for the Persian fleets, and it tips the whole war on its head because now the bridges that Xerxes has used to cross into Europe are now vulnerable because the Greeks can break out of the strait and attack the bridges, which leaves Xerxes stranded in Europe. And Themistocles, a man of many bright ideas, actually takes note of this, and he proposes that the Greek fleet should set out for the pontoon bridges across the Hellespont and destroy them, thus trapping Xerxes in Europe, which would be a major catastrophe for the Persians. However, Aristides disagrees with this scheme, and he responds with
It's the
uh,
reckless plebeian
yeah,
who is suggesting something completely
yeah,
stupid in his view. And this is not an, I would just add that it was not just an Themistocles versus Aristides issue about what they should be doing after Salamis with their navies, because Xerxes has already began his land retreat. Because keep in mind, Salamis happens at, I think, like October at the earliest estimate
yeah.
of the year. So we are approaching the winter months. Ships are not going to be sailing that often, if at all. It's especially not fleets. And they want to decide what to do before everyone has to return to winter quarters.
Yeah. And I believe Aristides' response to Themistocles was something akin to, I thought the idea was to drive the Persians out of Europe rather than trapping them inside. So it's sort of, so Themistocles is clearly this ambitious, very cunning person, but sometimes ambition can also lead to hubris, which is what this might have resulted in had Aristides not given his counsel. But there is a time pressure because the Persian fleet and army, the reason why they chose to fight at Salamis was because they wanted to destroy the Greeks all at once, and they obviously can't stay in Greece, all of them, for the entire winter. Some of them are eventually going to have to leave. Now, the Persian command is divided. Persian commander Xerxes' command is sort of divided between staying with the army or going back to Persia, because if he goes back to Persia, he can settle a lot of internal disputes or the fallout of the news of the Battle of Salamis, and also perhaps managing to prevent parts of his empire from breaking off once they hear the news of the defeat.
I should also just add at this point, Xerxes has kind of lost that political rallying cry for the invasion since they sacked and burned Athens before the Battle of Salamis, which is what he was a proposed goal by set by his father Darius for in revenge for the burning of the Temple of Sardis.
Yeah,
Now that has been completed, so you kind of lost a bit of your political justification. And as you rightly mentioned, if he has to go back, because the Persian Empire is controlled by the great king in from his capital, by the satraps, and satraps are pretty much kings in their own right. in their realm. They just have to pay homage to the great king. And many of them would be ambitious or are part of peoples that are not happy being under the Persian yoke. And you definitely would want to break apart. So it does make sense for a strong percentage of the commanders wanting to say that, King, please go home. You really would be needed there.
The problem is that Xerxes would be abandoning his army in Europe if he did this, and the implications of this are that he would effectively be losing quite a lot of face, since this would effectively be an admission of defeats for the sort of more larger, grander goals of the expedition to subjugate all the Greeks, and and if you read the tragedy The Persians by Aeschylus, the Greeks very much perceive Xerxes coming back to Persia as a sort of quite shameful and sort of desperate act. In the play, Xerxes comes back and he's very disheveled. He's talking about how his fleet got utterly smoked at Salamis. He's lost everything. The Persian Empire is in revolt. He hasn't had time to wash himself, etc., etc. So at least if so, him leaving the army in Europe and coming back to stabilize the empire also has its drawbacks. However, his chief commander Mardonius has a very useful proposal for him. And the proposal is that Mardonius will remain in Europe with picked troops of the Persian army, while Xerxes will take the army back across the Hellespont into Asia, which is very useful because if Mardonius succeeds in conquering all of Greece, then the victory would be dedicated to Xerxes, because Xerxes would have appointed Mardonius and made the correct decision. However, if the expedition is destroyed under Mardonius' command, then Mardonius proves a useful scapegoat for Xerxes.
Yeah.
With this decided, Mardonius remains in Europe while Xerxes takes part of the army back across the bridges into Asia, while the Persian fleet escapes to Ionia, basically the the Greek western coast of Anatolia.
I would also just add this. It was at this time when Xerxes is moving back via the land route, and emissary from the Spartans comes after Salamis, telling the king that he is going to pay for the death of Leonidas. And it was said, according to Herodotus, that the great king just laughed at them and just said, Mardonius will deal with you. And just to add, it's even though Xerxes is taking a good chunk of the army back, Mardonius is still being left with a pretty powerful force, which is well over 100,000 strong by at least even modern estimates. I'm pretty sure Herodotus would probably say it's like, like 2 million Persians were still left. But it is a strong force. And if I'm not mistaken, he also has the immortals with him. So that is a big statement that at least Xerxes is wanting his general to succeed by leaving the elite core of the Achaemenid army with him.
Yeah.
And Mardonius is pretty closely related to the Great King, I might add. So it was his father who was one of the seven major nobles that helped prop Xerxes' father Darius up to the throne, and the families grew closer through a lot of marriages and such. And Mardonius is actually both the nephew and brother-in-law of Xerxes himself, and he's hoping also if he completes the subjugation of Greece, the entire region will become his as his personal satrapy. And that is also one pretty, his own selfish goal. And he is a pretty capable commander, having in the years prior to the invasion starting just subjugated Thrace as well, pretty brutally and efficiently. So it's a pretty decent choice of a commander to be led to left in command here.
Absolutely. And he's going to need a competent commander in the region because as Xerxes is going back to Asia, the Greek city of Plataea erupts in a revolt. Plataea is a polis in the sort of north of Greece, bordering
You can see it in
Macedonia.
on the map here in the orange region. It's one of those three, the leftmost extension that's jutting out in the Aegean Sea. You can see it right near Olynthus.
Yeah,
That's
and
the
this
city.
city, yeah, this city breaks out in revolt, and obviously it's behind the Persian lines, so it carries a degree of sensitivity, especially since they're fellow Greeks. The good news is that that Mardonius has a capable lieutenant by the name of Artabazus, and he manages to besiege Plataea and put down the revolt. Uh, it's worth making a note of this name Artabazus because he will show up later in the campaign, and in Herodotus's account, he sort of becomes the voice of reason in the Persian camp, whereas Mardonius wants to engage the Greeks in battle. He's ambitious. If he wins this fight against the allied Greek army and takes the entirety of Greece, then it's obviously glory to his name. And obviously, he has a lot riding on this since he wants Greece to become his personal satrapy. Artabazus becomes the sort of voice of caution. And this is quite a common thing, common trope in Greek history where there's this voice of caution that speaks with the sort of benefits of hindsight.
So he's the Parmenion here.
Yeah. But this is what's happening on the Persian side of the story. If you go to the Greek side, the Greeks are having a great time. They've just won this. They're elated. They've won this magnificent victory at Salamis. And in a rare show of unity and respect between Greek cities, the Spartans actually honor Themistocles with a crown. And Themistocles is given this trip to Sparta where he joins in the victory parade. They give him a crown, and he actually makes his way back to Athens with a Spartan escort, which is a massive, massive honor, which they had never given to any statesman from another Greek city-state. So Themistocles is
Ego
over the
going on
moon.
high.
Yeah. Themistocles is over the moon at this. And relations between Sparta and Athens are actually pretty good. They actually agree a battle plan for the next season's campaign, where the Greek fleet under the Spartans, under another Spartan admiral, this time the other second king of Sparta, Leotychides. He's the second king of Sparta, and he's also a grown adult because Leonidas, the king of Sparta who died at Thermopylae, he leaves behind a son, and thus, obviously, this child can't lead the city-state of Sparta, so he goes under a regency under Pausanias, one of his relatives. An interesting figure, to say the least. Now, I've gone
So
through the...
maybe we should,
Yep.
suggesting before we do that, we get into the campaigning season of the year 479 BC, perhaps we should turn back the clock a little bit, talk about one of the key characters of the upcoming battle, Alexander of Macedon. And folks, this is not the Alexander, because the guy we know as the Great, he was the third Alexander. This is the first.
Alexander I is a vassal of the Persian king. However, he does have ties to Greece owing to the sort of claimed heritage of his dynasty, the Argead dynasty. They are called the Argead dynasty because they claim to have emigrated to Macedon from Argos after being exiled from the city there. And it's based on this that they sort of claim Greek relations and Greek heritage, and it becomes the sort of basis for Macedon's future participation in the Olympic Games.
Keep in mind, most for the audience, most Greeks regarded the Macedonians as barbarians. They said that these guys are not Greeks, and to the ancient Greeks, anyone who's not part of Greece, right? Or maybe you could just say the Ionians and all are still part of them. Everyone else are barbarians. So Macedonians, Thracians, Persians, they're all barbarians. Carthaginians, Phoenicians, all barbarians.
Yeah, and it's important to sort of remember that barbarians, barbaroi, are just non-Greeks. They are not savages. So plenty of Greeks are perfectly happy working together with barbarians when it suits their own interests. So you have Greek tragedians and Greek philosophers going to the courts of Macedon because it's a kingdom and Macedon has quite a lot of gold inside of it. So if you want to sort of gain prestige as a sort of court musician or court historian, then you're
or
not
just
going to
get
turn
paid.
down. Yeah, if you're not going to turn down an offer from the Macedonian king, basically, even though he's a barbarian. And this willingness to work with barbarians and sort of receive them will end up playing a crucial role in the following events of the campaign.
I think when the Persians came through, right? When
Yeah,
Xerxes first came in with his massive army, it is, I think, at that time Alexander, realizing that his kingdom is not in any position to resist, he takes the obvious option, which is also what, in all fairness, the Beotians did, is like, yep, let's just surrender. We're not going to get our city sacked.
yeah.
Strange that they don't get as much hatred as the Thebans for this.
I mean, the Thebans are being hated because they're Mobilizes. They're Greeks who defect to Persia, whereas Alexander is an independent king among many in the Persian army. And it's worth remembering that even there are even Ionian Greeks fighting alongside Xerxes because they're obviously Persian subjects.
I mean, it is right now a satrapy of the empire,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
they are going to be calling them up. But I think as we come to the uh, camp, now we're coming into 479, spring is thawing, so the armies are going to start being able to move again.
yeah,
Right, the harvest would have been completed, so this is now the time.
yeah,
And this is when Mardonius first strikes at the Greek alliance with diplomacy.
yes.
And
Well,
the first mission is led by said king of Macedon.
yeah, Mardonius spends the winter in Thessaly because Thessaly is very friendly to the Persians and it's got open plains, plenty of fodder for horses, sources of water, and it's also quite close to the Persian province of Thrace and also Macedon as well. So the supply lines are very safe for the Persians, even though they have quite a large army. However, bearing in mind that the Greeks are usually, as the Persians find them, disunited and squabbling, and with plenty of shenanigans between them. So Mardonius sends King Alexander of Macedon to Athens in order to break them off the Greek alliance. Because the fact that the Persians had already destroyed Athens is, in their eyes, a bit of a sort of advantage, let's say, because it's mission accomplished. The grievance that the great king holds towards the Athenians has now been satisfied because the temple that they burned in Sardis during the Ionian revolt has been returned in kind by the burning of the Athenian Acropolis. So Alexander goes to Athens, now liberated from Persian control, even though it's been utterly ransacked, and he presents to the Athenians this proposal for the Athenians to Medize and defect to the Persians because the great king has now forgiven them for their crimes.
And the offer he put, like that Mardonius sent via Alexander the First, was pretty generous to the Athenians. They are going to be forgiven, right? As you rightly mentioned, hey guys, we're all cool. They said, we will restore all of Attica to you, all your lands will come back to you, all your territorial positions. And hey, you want more? We're happy to give it to you. You get to keep your form of governance. And all you just need to do is accept some homage to the great king. And otherwise, you are just free to do as you want. And the Athenians reject this, but the strategic reason also why Mardonius wanted to put this offer was to pry the alliance apart. The Athenians, as we discussed in our Salamis episode, is easy 50 to 55% of the Greek navy. And if you remove this contingent from the Greek navies, even the diminished Persian navy after Salamis would be free to go through the coast and raid and ransack the Greek isles and coastal settlements with ease. So Athens is the key to the entire alliance and the war effort, and Mardonius is trying to pry them apart, and they reject it pretty firmly, saying
Yeah,
that as long as the sun holds course, we will make no argument and we will fight him without ceasing and trust in the aid of the gods and heroes and houses that he's desecrated. That was pretty much the response Mardonius got, if we quote
yeah.
Herodotus.
And it's most important because the Spartans also now know that the Athenians are key to winning the war. So once they hear that Alexander is in Athens, they rush emissaries over to the Athenians, promising economic aid because they know that the Athenians basically had their harvest destroyed and they had their city ransacked. And so they promise to economically support the women and children of the Athenians, as well as to offer military aid so that the Athenians don't lose their city again.
Yeah, they said for the entire duration of the war, we are willing to feed your entire population
Yeah.
from the Peloponnese.
And
Pretty
it's
generous offer.
yeah, and it's most important that they do this because the Peloponnesians have not yet finished building the defensive wall across the isthmus. So if Athens defects to Persia, then the Persians will manage to march all the way through to the wall, which is currently not yet fully prepared. This is the reason that Herodotus sort of gives for why the Spartans are so desperate to keep the Athenians on side. And the Athenians, as you say, respond to Alexander quite emphatically. They, according to Herodotus, they say the following: "We know of ourselves that the power of the Mede is many times greater than ours. There is no need to taunt us with that. Nevertheless, in our zeal for freedom, we will defend ourselves to the best of our ability. But as regards agreements with the barbarian, do not attempt to persuade us to enter into them, nor will we consent. Now carry this answer back to Mardonius from the Athenians, that as long as the sun holds the course by which he now goes, we will make no agreement with Xerxes. We will fight against him without ceasing, trusting in the aid of the gods and the heroes whom he has disregarded and burnt their houses and their adornments. Come no more to the Athenians with such a plea, nor under the semblance of rendering to us a service. Counsel us to act wickedly. For we do not want those who are our friends and protectors to suffer any harm at Athenian hands." This is what they say to Alexander, but to the Spartans, they respond, "Know this now, if you knew it not before, that as long as one Athenian is left alive, we will make no agreement with Xerxes."
And not to mention, they also told the Spartan emissaries they don't need Spartan charity, they want Spartan armies. They don't give a shit about the food.
Pretty emphatic response for now, because the Spartans are preoccupied building this wall across the isthmus, and Mardonius is about to re-enter Attica. So Mardonius, once he gets this response, picks up camp and begins marching through Thebes into Attica in order to reoccupy the city of Athens. And as the days go by, it becomes pretty clear to the Athenians that the Spartans aren't rocking up to help them, which is perceived by them as a sort of act of treachery because they had agreed, following the Battle of Salamis, that the Athenian and the Spartan army would meet up together and take the fight to Mardonius in Beotia, rather than fighting the Persians in Attica, which has already been devastated.
Yeah, and again, for the second time within a year, Athens is sacked while the population migrates against Salamis, and the Spartans are building the wall at the Isthmus of Corinth, which, keep in mind, right from the before the Battle of Thermopylae, that was literally the only thing that they wanted, was to block off the Peloponnese to the Persian army. It was only Themistocles who first even suggested, let's go into Thessaly and then Thermopylae. So the Spartans don't really care, and once the Athenians right now, who are quite pissed off with the Spartans, and understandably so, they the Mardonius now sends an emissary to Salamis, giving the same offer that Alexander the First had provided while the Athenians are on the island. And it is at this time we can see the, I don't know if you want to call it the resolve or the panicked overriding thinking in the Athenian camp, which is now prey to suspicion, worry, and you know, backstabbing or whatever. Because when the Persian emissary arrives on Salamis, most of the counselors just want to shut him up. They're like, "Yeah, we're not listening to you. Just get lost." It was then one of the counselors of Athens, like Caius. I'm sorry if I'm
Lycidas.
Lycidas. I'm sorry I butchered the name. Uh, he was the only counselor that just said we should just at least hear him out and then put the proposition to vote to the people. Hey guys, we're democratic. We should definitely listen to this. And the only response he got was being stoned to death by the fellow counselors. And when the women of Athens, right, the wives of the counselors, find out about this incident. They just go to his house and murder his wife and kids.
Holy
Now,
shit. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
it,
It is one of the
it,
darkest moments of Athenian political history.
it was
That's a stance.
savage.
Yeah,
It you see, and on one side you can definitely argue that this is showing the resolve, right? That we're not going to entertain surrender. It's kind of like how you would say Rome was in the aftermath of the Battle of Cannae, for example. Like it is kind of showing that kind of resolve. Or you could also, on the flip side, make an argument that they are so prone to suspicion and overthinking now that rational thought is not going to go forward with them. They are just going to be like on the edge at teetering. So any like they just look somewhere and they'll probably think, oh shit, it's a Persian soldier near me. So,
yeah.
and
I
as you
I
mentioned,
actually
it was a pretty dark
I
incident.
actually sort of examined like similar incidents like this during the Peloponnesian War as part of my doctoral thesis. I studied a lot of sort of the ancient Athenian sort of treatment and laws and cultural reception of treason, of betraying the Athenian democracy, and the stoning of Lycidas is definitely a major sort of event in that history. And I sort of push back a little on sort of the characterization of irrational because I emphasize that a lot of it is perceived as rational. It's quoted in the language of collective security and service to the city state. And so the way the Athenians are looking at this is that there are these sort of traitors like Lycidas who are capable of doing sort of horrible, like treacherous things, such as betraying the entire city to the Persians, and no amount of social rehabilitation is going to help them. So if you have a situation like that, and there is actually an orator in the 4th century who, on traitors and treason, he sort of says, uh, I would rather uh, kill the traitor early before he has an opportunity to act, rather than sort of following due process and executing him afterwards when all the damage has already been done. So this is sort of the way that the Athenians are just thinking about sort of treason and traitors to sort of appeal and interest in collective security and on the sort of integrity of the city state. Which, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Lycidas because I looked a lot about that incident during my thesis days.
It was. I get like I will just say I can understand. It's not justified in my view of how they just stoned him to death, but the aftermath his family suffered, like that was
Yeah,
extreme.
yeah, and
And it is
it's not unusual in Athenian history either because uh, disgrace, sort of glory for the family, is carried down along the generations. So you'll have people claiming descendant from heroes or like my ancestor gave a bottle of olive oil to Heracles, and that's why I'm so good at athletics. So glory is passed down, but also infamy is also passed down as well. So you will also have uh, decrees striking citizens off the list for treason, and sort of not only saying this person is struck off the citizen list on pain of death, he can't re-enter Attica, but they also banish all of his descendants as well. So you sort of have this sort
it's
of
sort of also like the Romans as
yeah,
well, right? Even they
yeah,
also
yeah,
had pretty harsh. And as you said, the same thing of the glory and the shame of families were passed down for the generations.
yeah,
And I would also say at this point, the Athenians make a desperate emissary to the Spartans, who are right now not even at the wall at the Isthmus of Corinth. They are in Sparta,
yeah.
in Laconia, because they are having another religious festival, which said religious festival did not allow them to come in time for the Battle of Marathon, like some other religious festival. And it was also a reason why the Spartan army could not move in force for the Battle of Thermopylae.
Yeah, this is becoming a bit of a trope among the Spartan army that they're being prevented from their duty to the gods by celebrating religious festivals. And by the way, religious festivals are actually quite fun occasions in ancient Greece. So you know that the Spartans are having a lovely time at this festival while the Athenians are huddled together, having been deprived of their city on the island of Salamis. But
Sometimes
yeah,
religious festivals could cost you quite a bit. You could ask
yeah,
Syracuse during the Punic Wars. But
yeah. They
the Athenians do come and they are like, guys, you got to help us. And they just said, and then they point blank told them that the offer that the great king has given us is very, very beneficial to us. We stand to gain a lot, but we are committed to the alliance of us Greeks fighting to get these Persians out of our lands for good. Now, you guys are just hiding behind your walls, you know, because now that you feel like because the Spartans had sent emissaries, so they saw the Athenians telling off Alexander the First with the first offer from Mardonius. So they're like, okay, these guys are not going to betray us. They are loyal to the cause, so we could just build up the wall at the Isthmus of Corinth and just chill for the rest of our lives. So the
yeah,
Athenians are pretty pissed off and demand action. And the crazy thing is, for 10 days, they get no response, right? The main thing is the Ephors have not even bothered to give the Athenian emissaries any thought, right? The Ephors in Sparta society are like you could call them like elders. They are the ones who, along with the kings, would be making key decisions such as the movement of the army and such. And it was only on the 10th day of the festival that the Athenians finally just tell the Spartans, send us aid with a full force of soldiers, or we're done. We'll go over to the Great King. We stand to gain from it. And then you guys are on your own.
yeah,
And it was only at the evening of the 10th day, and after one of the Spartan commanders was able to persuade the Ephors to act, the Athenians get a message. The Spartan army is marching at dawn. And this time it's not a token force like what was sent at the Battle of Thermopylae a year ago. It is a massive force that the Spartans are actually sending this time. And if I'm not mistaken, we're talking about 5,000 Spartan hoplites citizens. So these are like, the main guys of the Spartan army, along with 5,000 allied hoplites. And each Spartan citizen is accompanied by seven helots as his servants and combatants with light infantry for the battle. So that's 35,000. And the allied infantry will be having at least one light infantry. So it's a massive force coming from the Peloponnesian force, like, area right now. And I think some modern historians estimate that at the time, basis the estimates on Spartan population, this is about a third of all Spartan manpower that is moving up to the Isthmus of Corinth and beyond. And as they march, also, the rest of the cities around the Peloponnesian Peninsula start to send in their reinforcements. And when they get the good omens to cross the Isthmus of Corinth, they meet up with the Athenian contingent and their allies, and then they march towards Beotia because that's where Mardonius has also moved back. Because moment he got news of the Spartan army mobilizing and beginning its march, he would move back to the city of Thebes, around the city near Thebes in Beotia, because it is land that has fodder and wide open areas where his cavalry can wreak havoc on the Greek forces. That is his tactical considerations. And the Greek army is going to follow there. And they are going to all mobilize near Plataea as they cross the mountain range of the Clitherion, and they're just going to be encamped there. And Mardonius is also nearby, about 4 or 5 kilometers from the foothills of that mountain range. So I think, as you can see on this map, the first position we see on the bottom right, that is, you could just say, is broadly where the Greek army was. And it was a massive force that has finally come to be. And if you don't mind, I'll just, maybe this is just me getting into the numbers, but we are talking about 5,000 um, Spartan hoplites and their allied hoplites, 8,000 from Athens, 5,000 from Corinth, 3,000 from Megara, 3,000 from Sicyon, Gaia 1,500, and Phileas 1,000, Trozen 1,000. And then you have about a miscellaneous assortment of city states such as Leperum, Chalcis, Plataea, Potidaya, who all are sending contingents, and together we are talking about just about 40,000 hoplites marshalling. Each non-Spartan hoplite is accompanied by about one light infantryman who would be supporting him, and the Spartans, as I said earlier, are supported by seven helots. Right, that was a typical ratio when a Spartan soldier went into war. They were accompanied by seven helots. Contemporary sources, you could say that the combat forces for the Greek alliance is closer to 100,000, and you can put in about 50,000 for non-combatant roles in the camp. It's truly a massive force. The Persian army that they're facing is even larger. So, should we get into the Persian army disposition, or
Yep.
should I? All right, just wanted to check. The Persians, on the other hand, there are about uh, 40 to 50,000, standard the core Achaemenid troops, and also the 10,000 immortals. You have a similar number of, in the Bactrians, Indians, and Sakas. And between the Ionians, Thebans, and some Macedonian soldiers, there is an allied Greek contingent on the Persian camp of about 20,000 or so soldiers, and they have about 5-6,000 cavalry led by a pretty competent commander. We'll get into him as the battle starts, and other smaller contingents from various areas such as the Ethiopians, Egyptians, Phrygians, and Thracians. So it is a force that would be a minimum of 150,000 men, even by contemporary standards. So the Greeks are anyways outnumbered pretty badly. And the
Yeah.
Persians, as we can see on this map, are camped on the plains. They have cavalry. The Greeks have no cavalry. And this is exactly why Mardonius wants to fight in the plains, because that's where cavalry is going to be very effective. And that is exactly why the Greeks are camped near the foot of the mountain passes, because cavalry is not going to come.
Yeah. Uh, One interesting thing to note apparently occurs in the Greek camp is that the Greek allies all come together and collectively swear what is called the Oath of Plataea. And the oath is as follows: I will not hold life dearer than freedom, nor will I abandon my leaders, whether they are alive or dead. I will bury all allies killed in the battle. If I conquer the barbarians in war, I will not destroy any of the cities which have fought for Greece, but I will consecrate a tenth of all those which sided with the barbarian. I will not rebuild a single one of the shrines which the barbarians have burnt and razed, but will allow them to remain for future generations as a memorial of the barbarians' impiety. Most of these conditions end up getting broken as Greek history goes on, and the ancient historian
That's very shocking.
The ancient historian Theopompus actually thinks that this oath never happened. That's a fake oath, and it does bear quite a lot of similarity to an oath sworn by Athenian sort of military recruits in the 4th century. But yes, apparently this oath does occur, and it sort of becomes an explanation of why the Athenians take so long in rebuilding the Acropolis, because it's only until Pericles that you have this sort of big Periclean building project that makes the Acropolis the familiar sight we see today. And so the Greeks are encamped on the Kythairon, on the high ground, facing opposite the Persians. The Persians are behind the river Asopus, and there is an interesting another oracle associated with this battle, that whoever crosses the river Asopus will lose the battle. Now, I do have to say, as the audience will probably tell, I don't take much faith in oracles, but yeah, I'd assume that the army who crosses the river would have a bit of a disadvantage as compared to the army currently holding their position on the river. I'm sure most
River
total war
crossings are
players-
not
Yeah.
easy things. They take hours, and that is exactly why no one wants to do it easily. But at this point, the Greeks do tend to come under attack now.
Yeah.
Right. This is
Now,
the cavalry attack because
Yeah, crossing river is a lot easier when you're on horseback, because you can just ride through the river at a fording point, which is what the Persian commander Mecistius manages to accomplish. he attempts to launch a surprise attack on the Greeks, specifically picking out the Megarians, who are holding a slightly weaker position on flatter ground, and the Persian cavalry almost managed to overwhelm the Megarians
And I
until the
would just add,
Athenians come to the rescue.
I would just also add, he was pretty strategic in the way he was employing his cavalry. No mass charges, but wave after wave of hit and run attacks. And the Greeks don't have many missile troops. They have some, but not many. And as you rightly said, the Megarians, who are kind of at this moment, you could say they were sort of in the center of the line. Greg, I think you could just go back to the previous map because this is not yet the map that we need. This was on day one, and they send messengers to all the commanders, right? So they go to Pausanias, who is the supreme land commander, and they also send emissaries to Aristides and Xanthippus, who are the commanders of the Athenian contingent, saying, "Guys, we need help. We are holding, but we do need your help. Otherwise, we are going to rout and we will flee." And from the supreme commanders or like the main leaders, nothing turns up. It is only 300 Athenians under Olympiodorus of the Athenians with some missile units that are the only units that initially respond to the Megarians, and they help initially stem the tide a bit. But the cavalry attacks that have been instigated by Masticius is pretty effective. And then, literally, with a stroke of luck, one of the arrows pierces an unarmored part of Masticius's horse, and the beast, you know, screams in pains and just rears itself up, and Masticius is, thrown off the horse. And at that moment, as we can see in this image, the Greeks literally charge forward, trying to, kill him. And his armor was said to be so splendid and well made that they actually had no success in the quite a few dozen blows that were rained on him until one soldier managed to get him in the eye, and that killed him, and that raised the morale. And it was around this time when he died, the Persian cavalry also noticed that, hey guys, our commander's not here. And then they see him just falling to the Greek swords, and they then come on a massive charge to avenge their commander. And it is at this moment that the Athenians had started to send in more soldiers in force, and they managed to hold up the tide. And since the Persians are no longer employing that wave attack, they managed to beat off the Persian cavalry. And the Greeks are pretty elated because this is it's not a major victory. It's like compared to the number of people that both armies have, it is a small skirmish, but it's a blow for the Persian cavalry because one of the most popular generals has been killed, and the Greeks basically parade his body around, you know, to boost the morale, and they
Yeah,
just send it across the entire line.
yeah. This is one of the reasons why the Persians sort of made a last-ditch charge into the Athenian lines, because you do not want the body of your commander to fall into enemy hands, because this is what happens. The Athenians sort of dump Mecistius's body onto a cart and parade it around the Greek camp, and this improves morale quite a lot. And the actually the I think armor and sort of arms of Mecistius are actually retained by the Athenians as war trophies. So even in the sort of there's a Greek tourist called Pausanias, not Spartan regent, a different guy from later on, a few centuries after, and he sort of goes around Greece looking at all the sites, sees a bunch of museums, exhibits, and the Athenians have still retained the arms of Mecistius, which they seized at the Battle of Plataea. So obviously, this boosts Greek morale, having these trophies and sort of having this initial skirmish against the Persians. And this heartens the Greeks so much that they actually advance more confidently from their position on the Kathiron onto the plains of Plataea, which is next to a water source.
The spring of Gargo. One sec. Need to just remember how to pronounce the name.
Yeah,
Otherwise, I'm just going to
it's
call it the
the
spring of G. Spring of
Gargaphia.
Gargaphia. Sorry.
The Gargathian springs. Yes,
Right. And there
because
was also a tactical consideration. It was to just alleviate the water requirements of
yeah,
the army.
yeah,
But the Persians also did not advance because of said oracle prophecy. But at the same time, Mardonius is not at all, idle, because while the armies form up for battle, right, and from day two onwards, they don't engage, right, and the standard formation that has been taken during these, like you know, dispositions is the Athenians have taken the left flank of the Greek line, the others take the center, and the Spartans and the Peloponnesians tend to take the right, as shown correctly in this diagram here. And when the Persians would line up, as you can see in the red line, you would have the Bactrians, Medes, and the Indians who would be forming the center of the line in the Persian army. You would have the allied Greek contingent, like the Greeks that are fighting for the Persians, on their right flank. So they would be facing the Athenian contingent. And then you have the Persian proper, who would be on the left, facing the Spartans. But again, no one is going to cross right now. And, the omens as well is suggesting that everyone needs to be defensive. And this is like what is reported to have happened in both camps. And I don't think the Spartans would be able to slaughter every animal like they normally do, because there are other Greek cities who don't follow that tradition and tend to go for, one sacrifice a day. The Spartans, on the other hand, we know would go through maybe 100 if needed.
yeah. Mardonius has a
And
similar predicament because he's also continually sacrificing animals as well, and he can't get a good omen either.
if the first doesn't
He,
give you the right
yeah,
entrails, just but
yeah.
the I'll just say one thing: the disposition of the Greeks did open a big opportunity for the Persians.
So Mardonius is currently sacrificing animal day after day, and eventually he is going to run out of supplies because he can't just do this forever. He can't just encamp on the river Asopus for the rest of his life.
And at the same time, it's a similar problem with the Greeks. The Persians are also worried because reinforcements are also coming down from the
Yeah,
valley and strengthening the Greek lines over the days. Because while they did reposition the cavalry skirmish, which saw the Persian cavalry commander die, happened on the day one of the deployment, they repositioned on day two. Now an entire week has passed. Right, it's now day
yeah.
eight. No one has really attacked, and the Persian advisors are worried about the Greek positioning strengthening and also their supply situation. But the same supply issues is also a worry for the Greeks. And on the ninth of the eighth day, Mardonius launches a devastating cavalry raid onto the Greek lines. So from their original positions, that's where supply wagons come, and they ambushed a massive convoy, which, according to some sources, had over 500 beasts of burden, carrying a lot of supplies for the army. And it was said that what they once they had their fill of the slaughter, like killing the man and beast without any care, the Persians had destroyed 120 tons of supplies and taken some back to their own camp. And this is pretty big. And the reason also why the Greeks are in this position is because of the spring, because it is estimated that the Greeks are requiring 300,000 liters of water a day, to sustain themselves. That is why they are at the spring here. So now your supplies are getting interdicted quite successfully by the Persians. You're also running out of food like they are. It's not a good situation for either army, in all honesty.
It can get worse because the Persians end up polluting the springs.
That is so true. And a lot of advisors actually wanted him to push back to Thebes, pull back the Persian army to Thebes so that they could restock, resupply. The Greeks are not going to have a improvement in their supply situation while they will be replenished. And they also said, guys, maybe we should just use some diplomacy and pry the Greeks apart, because I think the Persians are pretty aware how
Yeah,
disunited the Greeks are also.
yeah. This,
But
according to the writers,
Mardonius,
yeah, this is
yeah, this is,
Artabazus' suggestion, where he basically says, "Why don't you just pull back to Thebes, maybe even Thessaly, resupply there, and just come in another time? But before you go back in, make sure to bribe all of the prominent leaders in the Greek camp so they all defect to Persia and betray one another. Because in the
or
Persian
just bribe
experience,
the
this
Athenians.
has actually
But
worked. Yeah,
just bribe the Athenians. That's enough. And I'm pretty sure Mardonius was said, and this is what Astrobazus would do, but not what Mardonius would do, because that guy is now hell set on battle. So
yeah,
he does not want to do it. And on the night of the 11th day of the standoff, he gives a pretty impressive speech to the troops that rouses the morale. And on the 12th day, they actually do, you know, marshal into formation and, prepare to cross the river. Right. And we're talking about 200,000 combatant troops of, like, from heavy to light infantry, cavalry, missile units on both sides deploying on the plains here. But it is at this night that Alexander the First of Macedon slips out of the Persian camp to the Greek camp to warn them about the incoming attack. Because Mardonius is no slouch also, because he's not just going to recklessly attack. He has made elaborate plans on how he's going to deploy his army, which he thinks is to the best strength of it. And Alexander the First arrives and warns Pausanias about the incoming, Persian forces. And an emergency war council is held late in the night. And what happens is the start of utter shenanigans for 2 days in terms of deployment. Because, as I mentioned, from the second day of the battle, it had just been the Athenians and their allies on the left, the Spartans and their Peloponnesians on the right, and an assortment of the Greek city states holding the center. What was decided is they are going to switch it up on the 12th day when the Persians are crossing to give battle. So that the Spartans are now going to face the allied Greek contingent, and the Athenians are going to face, like, the proper Medes and Persians. And when the dawn breaks, Mardonius sees that the allied forces have, they're switching around, and he then starts his own switcheroo of his wings, because he's trying to redeploy his forces before they cross. And this is eating into quite a few hours of the daylight. And then a few hours later, he gets another message that the Greeks are reverting back to the original formation of day two. So now he countermands his own orders of redeployment. It just gets back to, like, yeah, what I said at the start of the day. So you can just imagine the amount of chaos that was going. But at the same time, he does launch his cavalry on the wings. And as you mentioned, Greeks have no response to this.
Psst. Hey you ever hear me talk about some great Pacific War movie or documentary like Pearl Harbor Minute by Minute over on Netflix and feel the urge to watch it for yourself? Uh-oh, you live in Japan, and your Netflix doesn't have it? Must suck to be you.
Sucks to be me right now.
Oh wow, Season 4 of Demon Slayer is out. Oh wait, I can't watch it on Canadian Netflix, but it's over on Japan Netflix? Whatever will I do?
Oh, no.
Being blocked from regional content? With private internet access, you too can watch Demon Slayer Season 4 by switching your IP address to Japan.
Yes! Hell yeah!
Why stop with Japan? With private internet access, you can change your IP address to over 84 different countries and every single US state, giving you access to region-restricted content all over the world.
Nice.
Many websites and services like Netflix are only accessible depending on your physical location, but private internet access helps you overcome these restrictions. Think about it. Without private internet access, it's like paying for a TV series and missing out on the latest season. Shots fired, Demon Slayer on Canadian Netflix.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
Ever fear people are gonna find your Google searches?
Banzai! Banzai! Banzai!
Private internet access makes sure that those Google searches remain a buried secret, as private internet access encrypts your internet access and has a no logs policy. Think you're safe with the local coffee shop's free Wi-Fi? No, you are certainly not. Private internet access gives you more privacy features than any other software and real-time protection from malware and trackers, giving you peace of mind knowing those Google searches remain seen by you and you alone. Private internet access has a no-log policy that they've defended in court, which means they are not storing any of your browsing data. Hey, are you like me using different devices under one household? Private internet access is available on all platforms and protects an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. I personally use private internet access to unblock movies and TV series from all across the globe, and I sleep easier writing scripts for my YouTube channel and others knowing my data is secure. Look, this is a no-brainer. Sign up with my link in the description of this video to get 83% off, plus 4 months for free, so it ends up being only around $2 per month. Signing up for private internet access is risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and 24/7 customer support is available. So don't forget to click www.piavpn.com/the Pacific War Channel, and a big thanks to Private Internet Access for sponsoring this video.
Yeah, all of these redeployments among the Greeks actually improves Mardonius' morale and confidence. And he even sends a messenger over who yells at the Spartans, you're Spartans, we were expecting you to be the best of the Greeks, but you're fobbing us off to fight the Athenians while you hide on the other end of the battle line. So I thought you were Spartans, and I thought you were proud and the best soldiers that Greece had to offer. And so, because you're the best soldiers that Greece has to offer, we're going to offer you this challenge of the two armies collectively don't have to fight, but why don't we decide the contest with a battle between the best of the barbarians, aka the Medes, versus the best of the Greeks, the Spartans, and see who wins this battle of champions, basically. And the Spartans don't fall for the bait, because they obviously know that Mardonius is taunting them and trying to embarrass them among their Greek allies. However, because they don't do anything, Mardonius gets even more confidence.
That's fair. And during these cavalry raids, while the mass bodies of infantry on both armies are in that confused redeployments, they manage to get behind the Greek lines, and the Persian cavalry basically poison the Gargantuan spring. They throw dead bodies, they throw some crops and waste, so it is not a usable spring anymore. So the Greeks are now screwed at that position, because the main tactical consideration for them to move up here was to be near the spring to alleviate their water requirements. And it is at that night that the confusion that we saw of redeployment reaches new heights, because
Indeed.
a war council is held, and they decide that there are a few springs near the city of Plataea. They will move back in their deployed formation. So the Athenians are still going to hold the left, the allies, other Greek city states will hold the center, and the Spartans are going to hold the right. Now, on paper, sounds like a brilliant plan, and the Athenians would be the first to withdraw because they are the closest, and the Spartans would be the last to withdraw, given they are also the furthest, and it was planned that they are going to be the rear guard of this withdrawal. Now, unfortunately, it's not an organized withdrawal. Craig, I think from our various discussions in the Pacific War, and such, we know the difference between a good withdrawal and a rout. If there was no Persians attacking, it would have been a rout, because the Greeks are not withdrawing in any order whatsoever. They just kind of go in a mob to the city of Plataea, and they're not even taking positions up properly. They are just kind of gravitating around the temple of Hera on the outskirts of the city. And at the same time, one particular Spartan battalion commander, who was not informed of the plan, thinks everyone are being bloody cowards for wanting to withdraw. So on the morning of the 13th day, the Greeks are trying to get back into a battle line, at least the Athenians and the centers, while the Spartans have not even moved. And it's kind of only in the morning that Pausanias finally says, okay, screw that battalion of Spartans. we are withdrawing as per the agreed plan. And that finally also gets the Spartans to move. But, Mardonius has been seeing this confusion, and this probably is just boosting his own confidence and belief in victory.
Yeah, if you want to get a clear picture of the shenanigans that are going on in the Greek camp during the night of withdrawal, Amorphoratus and Pausanias are having a full-blown argument about getting the Spartans back to a sort of hillock known as the island. It's basically surrounded by two streams of the Asopus River, which was the fallback point for the Greek army. As they're having this full-blown argument, the Athenian emissary, because the Athenians haven't moved at all, they've sort of noticed that the Greeks of the center have disappeared to the Temple of Hera, while the Spartans have just stayed where they are. And the Athenians, at this point, are not overly trusting of what the Spartans are planning on doing. So they send an emissary over, and the emissary literally walks into Pausanias and Amorphoratus having this wicked argument about whether they should withdraw or not. And he outright sees Amorphoratus chuck a stone down onto the ground, saying, "You voted without me. This is my vote that we stay here and fight." And Pausanias, this back and forth goes on for a while. Pausanias eventually gives up and moves the rest of the Spartan army back towards the island and requests the Athenians to follow them. However, Pausanias keeps the Spartan army moving at a pace which would allow Amorphoratus to catch up, and Amorphoratus eventually relents and follows the Spartan army. But this is absolute chaos among the Greek army. About a third of it isn't even armed, since they've gone up to the Temple of Hera, decided, mission accomplished, and ditched all of their weapons on the ground and are just lying around the temple. However, the Athenians are now exposed, and now the Spartans are also exposed, which leads Mardonius to launch his final attack to destroy the Greek army. And so Mardonius leads all of the Persian army, with exception of the Thebans and the Boeotians, and he takes all of these Persian troops and charges towards the Spartans. And the Persians are very eager to get to grips with the Spartans, simply because they know that time is of the essence, and they don't want the Spartans to organize themselves. And so they press the Spartans hard, and Pausanias, realizing the danger, sends a message over to the Athenians begging for them to come to his position and offer him support. However, the Athenians have problems of their own, because they're now on the other flank, and they're facing off against the Thebans. And because the Athenians are being pinned down by the Thebans, they're unable to offer aid to Pausanias.
And not to mention, the Persian army, the soldiers have been equipped in their native satrapy styles. So the fact that the Athenians and the left flank of them are fighting like the Greek allies and the Thebans, they are going up against a proper phalanx of heavily armored hoplites as well. Whereas while the Spartans are fighting, against overwhelming numbers, they're still fighting against relatively lighter infantry.
Even if the Athenians wanted to break off the phalanx and basically chance it and dash towards the Spartan positions, they wouldn't be able to do this, because the Thebans have cavalry in the area as well. The Theban cavalry of their city-states, rather, as opposed to sort of the Persian cavalry formerly commanded by Mecistius. And then Theban cavalry would basically be able to run them down if they sort of broke formation and tried to dash towards the Spartans. Now, the Spartans are also pinned down because the Persians are loosing arrow volley after arrow volley, and they're throwing javelins at them. And they find themselves in a bit of a predicament, because Pausanias is currently trying to sacrifice various animals in order to get a good omen for the battle. Alongside the Spartans...
You gotta love the Spartan.
Yeah.
You gotta love the Spartan tenacity for the sacrifice.
He's doing this all while the Tajians, the Spartan allies who are assigned to fight along the Spartan contingent, are also suffering heavy casualties from Persian missile fire. And so, as Pausanias is ordering all of these sacrifices, he becomes ever more desperate, and he looks atop the Temple of Hera, and he says a quick prayer to Hera, pleading for divine aid and a good omen. And it's at this point that the Tajians charge the Persian lines, desperate to get into melee combat because they can't take the arrow fire. And it's at this convenient moment that finally the Spartans get a good omen. And so the Spartans end up joining the battle following the Tajians. And Herodotus actually has a description of the battle, which is as follows. Now they, the Spartans, too charged the Persians, and the Persians met them, throwing away their bows. First, they fought by the fence of shields, and when that was down, there was a fierce and long fight around the temple of Demeter itself, until they came to blows at close quarters. For the barbarians laid hold of the spears and broke them short. Now the Persians were neither less valorous nor weaker, but they had no armour. Moreover, since they were unskilled and no match for their adversaries in craft, they would rush out singly and in tens or in groups, great or small, hurling themselves on the Spartans and so perishing. So because the Persians had taken to the field before they were able to get organised, they just throw themselves in their individual units against the Spartans, whereas the Spartans, even though there was this botched retreat, the actual Spartan contingent remains in order and in battle formation, and each of the units knows what the other is doing, and so they're able to hold the line against the Persians. Apart from one person, a fellow by the name of Aristodemus, who sees the oncoming Persians and throws himself upon them in order to redeem himself following his survival of the Battle of Thermopylae.
Yeah, so folks, he was the guy that followed his king's orders and returned to Sparta, and was because his fellow Spartan, who was also ordered to return, decided to turn back and join the last stand of the 300. He was blacklisted and considered a disgrace to Spartan society, and he just fought here with reckless valor and such fury that the Spartans themselves, who are a pretty hard bunch to also please at times, they just said, all right, you did enough to get yourself from this black mark, and you know, to have fully redeemed themselves yourself. But they did not offer him any special honor or valor, because he did ultimately fight with reckless suicidal intent, because that's what he did to kind of, this is all he had to do to try to redeem his name. Whereas for the Spartans, you have to fight well and valorous, but with kind of like the intention to live, and that's why he was not given any commemorative medals posthumously. On the other hand, uh, Amphiphates, the Spartan battalion commander who did not initially budge from the retreat, he did fight with uh, immense valor and courage that the Spartans did honor him with tributes after the battle. So
Yeah.
you could call it a tale of two Spartans.
Yeah, Amorphoratus is a relatively young Spartan commander. He's actually a relatively young Spartan in general. He's one of the sort of Spartan he's not a youth because he's graduated the Spartan Agoge, but he's quite young as Spartan officers go, and he actually dies in the struggle against the Persians during the battle. However, he's not the only high-ranking officer to die, because a Spartan actually picks out Mardonius, the Persian commander-in-chief, among the crowd, because Mardonius he sat atop a white stallion, prominently seen by everyone on the battlefield. And a Spartan by the name of Iamnestus decides to take a chance. He picks up a stone, lobs it across the line, and it strikes Mardonius, killing him. And the Persians, once they see their iconic commander go down, immediately begin to withdraw, even though they do try to stand their ground to fight over the body of Mardonius.
But morale has completely collapsed, because he was a pretty charismatic leader. The only contingent of the army that doesn't withdraw, that withdraws in good order, is the 40,000 under Atrabazos, who was, the cautious guy who said, let's just go back to Thebes, restock, or Thessaly, and just, bribe the Athenians or some other Greeks in our favor. His men withdraw in pretty good order, because they did not advance as fast with the main army, and they would even avoid going to the Persian camp which would be suffering a pretty ghastly fate. And he first goes to Phocis and then eventually via the Hellespont.
Yeah, he doesn't even stop in sort of Thessaly or Thebes, sort of Persian allies close to the front line. He takes a chance and runs all the way back to the Hellespont through Macedonian territory, which will prove unfortunate in hindsight. Now, we've covered what's happening on the Spartan side of the battle, where the Spartans are besting the Persians after killing Mardonius. However, on the Greek left, where the Athenians are occupying, they are fighting a hard battle against the Thebans, and only the Thebans, whereas according to Herodotus, many of the Greek subjects of the Persian king deliberately fight badly because they're secretly loyal to the Greeks, except for the Thebans, who fight well.
Herodotus sure had something against the Thebans.
The Thebans actually fight with zeal, and it's not sort of hard to see why, because the Thebans and the Athenians hate one another. So that was probably good enough for the Thebans.
Who doesn't hate the Athenians exactly, except Plataeans?
And on top of fighting well against the Thebans, when word reaches the Greeks who are currently occupying the Temple of Hera, the sort of Greeks who formerly held the center of the line but then ditched the army and then hung around this temple all day, word reaches these Greeks that the Spartans are actually winning the battle against the Persians, and so they quickly pick up all their arms and then run towards the Spartan position because they want a bit of share of the glory and also the loot, by the way.
Participation certificate, right?
Yeah. The problem is they run to the Spartan position in complete disorder. They don't form ranks whatsoever, and the Theban cavalry see this and they run them down, scattering them across the battlefield. And so these Greeks play very little useful role in the battle. It is primarily fought by the Athenians and Spartans and Tajians. And once the Thebans are pushed back by the Athenians, both the Athenians and Spartans then converge on the Persian camp at the conclusion of the battle. And the Spartans are already driven back the Persians back to camp, but they had sort of surrounded the camp because they were waiting for the Athenians to come along, since, according to Herodotus, the Athenians would actually know how to scale the palisades.
Even though the Aegeans were the first to break through.
And once the Tajians and then the Athenians and then the Spartans all get into the camp, just a great slaughter of men ensues. And Herodotus describes it in these words. In the end, the Athenians, by valour and constant effort, scaled the wall and breached it. The Greeks poured in through the opening they had made. The first to enter were the Tajians, and it was they who plundered the tent of Mardonius, taking from it, besides everything else, the feeding trough of his horses, which was all of bronze, and a thing well worth looking at. The Tajians dedicated this feeding trough of Mardonius in the temple of Athena Alia. Everything else which they took, they brought into the common pool, as did the rest of the Greeks. As for the barbarians, they did not form a unified body, again once the wall was down, nor did anyone think of defence, because the terrified men in the tiny space and the many myriads herded together were in great distress. Such a slaughter were the Greeks able to make, that of 260,000 who remained after Artabazus had fled with his 40,000, scarcely 3,000 were left alive. Of the Lacedaemonians from Sparta, 91 altogether were killed in battle. Of the Aegeans, 17, and of the Athenians, 52. And so the Battle of Plataea, although it begins in this moment of extreme Greek vulnerability and shenanigans, ends up in the casualty count being a very one-sided affair.
I'm definitely not taking Herodotus's casualty numbers, right? Because according to him, 600, he estimated that the total casualties, if you even count the other city-states, were about 652.
Yeah.
And the Persians, right, by his numbers, it's about 257,000 killed.
Yeah, this is when the Japanese in World War II were like, yeah, we destroyed every American aircraft carrier outside of Okinawa. It's like, yeah, okay.
But the modern consensus is we are talking about 7,000-8,000 or so dead for the Greeks. Because keep in mind, the Theban cavalry did easily rout the center, and unorganized infantry are absolute fodder for cavalry soldiers. And the Athenians and the Spartans on the respective wings were in pretty rough firefights, fighting for their lives literally. And while they had 7 to 8,000, the Persians, it's estimated, had at least 5 times as much loss. And this is not even counting the 40,000 of that withdrew from the battle. So you could say, in all practicality, the Persian army in Greece has been completely destroyed.
Yeah, the Persian army, field army that Mardonius is left with at the start of the camp and after the Battle of Salamis has effectively been destroyed. The camp's been utterly looted. The Greeks have managed to capture Mardonius' body, and Lampon, an Aegian commander, actually wants to cut Mardonius' head off and mount it on a spike in order to avenge the sort of treatment of Leonidas, because that's what the Persians had done to him. Pausanias actually declines to do this, and he sort of treats the body with honor as a fellow combatant, and rebukes Lampon the Aegian for this suggestion. The loot is divided pretty evenly.
But
And
one thing I would just add about Pausanias, he got 1/10 of all the loot dedicated to him privately, not to the state of Sparta, and he did not dedicate anything to the gods, which really affected his standing in Sparta for a long time. Well, actually, for the rest of his life.
Yeah, Pausanias actually has some interesting remarks the moment he sort of walks into Xerxes, into Mardonius' tent, because he sees all this opulence and all this grandeur, and he sort of says Xerxes is quite foolish because he sort of owned all this wealth, and he decided to come to Greece in order to deprive us of our belongings, even though he already had so much wealth to enjoy in the first place. So what the hell was even the point of coming to Greece? Because Greece at this point it's not exactly the poorest region on the planet, but it's definitely not as wealthy as Persia. And in Pausanias' mind, if he was Xerxes, he probably would have just stayed at home and enjoyed all of his money. And one other thing of note, if anyone wants to go on holiday to Istanbul anytime soon, is that the Greeks actually bring all the loot together and they set apart a tithe for the god of Delphi, Apollo. And from this was made and dedicated a tripod, which rests upon a bronze three-headed serpent. And on this tripod is engraved all of the Greek city-states that fought against the Persians. And it's sort of this spiral design of the three serpents entwined together. And you can actually still see this relic from the Persian Wars in Istanbul, because the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great takes the tripod and the serpent column from Delphi to his new capital at Constantinople and places it in full public display in the Hippodrome, which is where it remains to this day. You can't see the serpent heads because they were destroyed. It's this sort of broken column of entwined snakes, which is a very sort of very, very iconic monument in the Greek world. And
that was Plataea.
Yeah,
pretty much.
This is Plataea, and the Greeks then bury all of their dead separately. So the Spartans bury their dead, the Athenians bury their fallen soldiers, and the Aegeans will bury their fallen soldiers in separate graves. And among the dead are Amorphoratus, the Spartan commander who had quite a lot of responsibility in how the battle started because he refused to withdraw on time, and he dies valiantly in the battle, and he's placed in a tomb alongside of the Spartan youths. So the Spartans have 3 different tombs at Plataea, one for the Spartans, one for the Helots, and one for Spartan youths like Amorphoratus.
Are we going to be talking about Callicrates as well?
I mean,
he was supposed to be the most... He's supposed to be the most beautiful man in the Greek camp, and he wanted to distinguish himself as a warrior, but he did not get the chance because an arrow killed him before he was able to engage in combat. And we did also talk about Aristodemus who redeemed himself. You have that.
Now,
That's yeah.
Now, the Greco-Persian Wars, however, even after all the dead at Plataea have been buried, are still not over, because the Persian fleet, although battered after Salamis, are still at large because they've sailed back to Samos. And just as the Spartan army marches out to Plataea in order to sort of fulfill their commitments to the allied Athenians, the Spartan fleet departs across the Aegean to Ionia alongside the Athenians and the fleets of the other cities in order to finally destroy the Persian fleet. And before the Greeks arrive, they send heralds in their wake. And these heralds declare to the Greeks among the Persian camp that the Greeks, having conquered the Persians, are now come to liberate the Greek cities of Asia. This is actually quite an effective call to arms, so effective that the Persian commander starts distrusting the Ionian Greeks and orders all of them to be disarmed, which makes his position even worse. Because the Persians do not sally out to fight the Greeks at sea. They actually hold up in their fortified camp, which is behind a palisade and various fortifications, because they're so traumatized by this experience at Salamis, where this numerically vastly superior Persian fleet ends up getting destroyed by the allied Greeks. And so they don't even dare engage them in a naval battle. And so when Leotychides, the Spartan king commanding the Greek fleet, arrives at Mycale, he's actually very heartened by this situation. And this because the Persians have opted to fight a land battle rather than a sea battle, and he has a bunch of Spartans with him who are very good at fighting on land.
But the army here is also still pretty large. It is estimated that the Persians would mobilize about 60,000 or so soldiers. But that is, again, the statement of the historians who love to just give it. Modern day estimates is putting it around 15,000 if you even include the Marines that were pressed into service, since he's lost a lot of manpower by no longer trusting the Ionian Greeks.
Indeed. And the Spartan king actually has a bit of a trick up his sleeve, because he is aware that the Spartans and the Athenians are collectively marching up to Plataea in order to fight a land battle against the Persians. And so, in the Greek reception of the battles of Plataea and Mycale, the story is that these two decisive battles, one on land against the Persian army and one against the Persian fleet, they both happen on the same day. But the Spartan king reports, in order to encourage his men, that the Greeks have already won in Plataea, and that he had personally received a message saying that the Greeks have triumphed at Plataea, and this is the time to deliver the final decisive blow and
Did
crush
they have
the Persians.
Wi-Fi or something?
Yeah, so they would never threaten Greece again. However, this is such a bold-faced lie that even ancient Greek historians recognize the problem with this, because there is absolutely no chance that Pausanias managed to get a Greek emissary on a ship, sail it all the way to Mycale in time for Leotychides to actually give this statement definitively. This man clearly lied, saying that the Greeks had already won a battle which they hadn't even fought.
It would take them, I think, minimum of 3 days for a messenger to come from, where Plataea was. And this is just assuming perfect, communication, no hiccups, great weather for the ship as well.
Yeah.
I'm just going to leave that.
It actually works, though, because the Greeks at Mycale are heartened by this news, even though they might be scratching their heads to think about how it got to them so quickly.
Well, let's just say, since it worked out, it's for the best.
But even with this positive development, shenanigans still ensue, because the Greeks among the Persian side, the Samians and the Milesians, for once, they are united in common cause, because they actually start running towards the Greeks with their arms outstretched, because they're coming here to welcome the Greeks and defect to join the Greeks. However, all the Greeks see is this mass of men charging towards them. So they actually think that the Persians are attacking. And what ends up happening is that one of the wings of the Greek line, commanded by, I believe, the Athenians, ends up engaging the Persians first. And so the other wing of the army sort of hangs back and is very curious to sort of wonder what was going on. But eventually, the Greeks managed to prevail and push the Persians back into the fortified camp, where they proceed to storm the camp. And then the Greek vassals of the Persians defect back over to Greece, which leaves the Persians stuck trapped in the camp, nowhere to run. And so the Persians effectively end up getting slaughtered to a man. And the Persian fleet that sailed with so much promise and so much potency against the Greeks ends up getting burnt at anchor at Mycale, which puts an end to the naval threat of the Persians towards the Greeks.
The fleet ain't sailing away if there are no crew to man it.
Yep.
But it was estimated that both of these battles took place either on the 27th or 28th of August in 479 BC. And that does put the end of the Greek part of the Greco-Persian Wars on this particular theater, which is what we were intending to cover. But the war is going to continue because the Athenians are pretty adventurous. Right? It seems like they must have taken to Themistocles' hubris, and Sparta actually for a while will not even be involved in any sort of operations because they just felt their obligations have been completed, and they only start taking an active role again when they start seeing the Athenians gain a lot of power.
Yeah, Sparta actually, sorry to interrupt, but Sparta actually becomes a bit of a liability among the Greeks, since when all of the Ionian states declare independence from Persia, they sort of fall under Spartans' sort of domain and sort of suzerainty as this new Greek alliance of independent city-states. And Pausanias becomes the commander-in-chief of this alliance. However, he has such a high-handed approach that all of the Greeks end up despising him.
Not to mention, he pretty much falls into disgrace within a year after Plataea.
Yeah, he becomes so unlikable and so toxic among the Ionians that they end up defecting to the Athenians, and thus begins the Delian League, which becomes the Athenian Empire. And then you have the competition between the Athenians and the Spartans and the Peloponnesian War. Well, Pausanias is such a toxic figure, even in Spartan society, that after various legal proceedings where he's being accused of cutting a deal with the Persians, his own mother actually executes him because Pausanias runs away into this temple and basically claims sanctuary because you can't drag someone, even a guilty man, from a temple to kill him. So what? Because he was, I was
just going to say he was accused of plotting with the Persians, which goes to your point when we were talking in the aftermath of when he went through Mardonius' tent. Maybe he might have been seduced by that wealth because the Spartans are known for how we call today the Spartan way of living, right? Very austere, very minimalistic. It seems he's gone pretty anti-Spartan. He was also twice between 478 and 477 BC, tried and even imprisoned and stripped of the regency, which is a pretty big blow to your prestige.
And
so
Pausanias'
he had a pretty...
Yeah, Pausanias' mother actually picks up a brick. She doesn't throw it at him, though, like the Athenians do to Lycidas. She puts it on the entrance of the temple, which sort of indicates we're going to brick up the entrance to the temple and let him starve there as he claims sanctuary. So
his fate was decided by the gods.
Yeah, so that's the fate of Pausanias.
The god of hunger.
And the other hero of the Greco-Persian Wars, Themistocles, doesn't fare too better either, because even though he plays a significant role in constructing the Long Walls, which starts to fuel the Athens versus Sparta conflict and the sort of breakdown of the Athenian-Spartan alliance, since the Athenians will be able to sort of hold off on land and be fully reliant on the port of Piraeus to ferry in supplies and grain. Themistocles ends up being accused of Medizing by the Athenian public and ends up running away to Persia. So he's accused of
Yeah,
medizing,
he
and
gets
then he
ostracized.
medizes anyway. Yeah.
He's ostracized in 471 or 472, goes to an Argos, and then, Spartans then, accuse him of being complicit with
Yeah.
Pausanias' treason, and they want him to be tried by a congress of Greeks rather than just like Athenians, right? Because the rule
Yeah.
that generally prevailed was Athenians are only going to try Athenians, Spartans only Spartans, etc. And then he says, like, yeah, screw this, I'm out.
Probably the only two characters in the Greco-Persian Wars who have happy endings, well, kind of happy endings, are Aristides the Just, who actually proposes in the Athenian assembly following the war to allow the oarsmen, these sort of theses, these people who can't afford the hoplite panoply, have the right to hold political office, whereas before they had only had the right to vote. Aristides suggests that they had fought so well at the Battle of Salamis that they had proven that they had earned the right to lead their fellow Athenians in the city-state. However, he also dies destitute. He ends up giving basically all of his estate through various liturgies and public expenditure in order to support the city-state of Athens. And he is so destitute that his children are unable to pay for his funeral. And so the state has to step in and actually pay for Aristides' funeral, which, to be fair, was a grand affair because he's a hero of the Athenian democracy and a sort of hero of the Greco-Persian Wars. He fought at Marathon, Salamis, Plataea. He effectively fights in every single major engagement of the war apart from Artemisium. So he sort of honoured as this hero. Although he isn't honoured with a hero cult, because Themistocles, the traitor who flees to Persia, ends up being honoured with an Athenian hero cult as the father of the Athenian navy. So it's a mixed bag for Aristides. Well, probably
it sucks also for Themistocles as well.
Yeah, it's the only unambiguous happy ending is probably for Alexander of Macedon, because as Artabazus is retreating with the remnants of the Persian army, Alexander actually manages to ambush them and destroy the last remnants of Xerxes' expedition. And after this victory, manages to declare independence and separates himself from the Persian yoke. So yeah, Alexander, happy ending.
And he can also claim that he was the guy that got the intel of the Persian attack at Plataea. So I am there for my fellow Greeks. So he also gets those propaganda bonus points.
Yeah, and even better, it's Alexander's descendants, this Archead dynasty, who will produce Alexander III, you might know him as the Great, who will fully avenge the Persian Wars when he makes his invasion of Persia. Well, that's a story for another day.
His father that's gonna first avenge, the Greek Macedon to the Greeks first. I would say that. Just remember, his dad was more happy with his horse winning the Olympics than his son being born.
Well,
yeah, I guess that brings us our end to our mini series.
Yes, it brings it to a close, and I mean, it is a crowd pleaser to be sure. It's one of the most famous stories in all history. It was a lot of fun covering all this. So again, thank you, Dan, for taking us through this very long journey. And I think for the audience, I would assume a lot of people learn a lot of stuff that they would never heard before, because a lot of this is told, just in summary. We don't hear much about the aftermath of the characters, like you had just gone through, and some of the more niche information. So thank you.
And not to mention the Ionian Revolt, Battle of Plataea, Battle of Mycale. They are relatively, if you compare to what we know of Salamis, Marathon, and Thermopylae, not as well known, even though they were pretty significant events in their own right. So
yeah, of course.
Great people can learn the entire picture of how the entire conflict brewed up, and the other known events as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd also just like to thank both of you for giving me the opportunity to talk about ancient Greece. It's usually a rare opportunity that I get to geek out about ancient Greek history and to have such a receptive audience and encouragement. So yeah, I'd like to thank you for sharing your platform with me, and just to express that this series was a great pleasure to take
Absolutely.
part in.
It was our pleasure to have you as well, because you really know this area quite well. And I'm pretty sure in the future we are going to be having Dan return, because we are talking about a possible series on the Second Peloponnesian War, and also maybe with Alexander the Great, because that's definitely going to be a crowd pleaser.
Yeah, of
So,
course. Everyone loves
definitely looking
Alexander
forward to
the
that.
not so great, but maybe not as great as his father. I don't know, but yeah, of course. But before I let the audience go again, please watch us on YouTube. There's a lot of good visuals here that help with the battle formations, the geography, and all the characters. And if you'd like to further support the channel, consider joining the YouTube membership or check out my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel. By joining either of these, you get access to an exclusive podcast series, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for subjects I will tackle next. But stating all that, this has been the Greco-Persian Wars, and another thank you to Dan. Over and out.